Hey, it's good to be here today. Good to see everybody. Hi to everybody in the Strip District and in Butler. Hope you're having a great time, and here as well as here in Wexford, and those of you in the balcony, wherever that is. Okay, so good to be here with y'all, and I think we have some interesting stuff to think about today. These five different sort of encounters that Jesus had towards the end of his life here. Matter of fact, all of these encounters are encounters that Jesus had on the last day of his life. And this is a very sobering message in a way because of all the things that happened during this time. And I got to tell you myself, when I read through it, to prepare, I realized there was a lot of information here about other people, about these other sort of five people and groups that Jesus interacted with. And I thought to myself, that's a lot of information about people not Jesus. At this very important time, and I wondered kind of why it was there, all right? And so I thought a little bit about it, and I got two reasons I want to share with you. The first one is this one here. I think that what we want to make sure that we don't do is we think that somehow this is just some kind of nice story, about Jesus that somebody made up, and it seems to make sense, and it kind of flows, and it's interesting, and so forth, but it's just a story, okay? No. These things are rooted in historical fact. When Luke talks about the writing of his gospel in the very beginning of it, he says, I took to be careful to go around and collect all the information, all the data, all the accounts of what he said. And I talked to eyewitnesses, and I talked to people who knew people who were there. I got it all straight. And he says, the reason why is I want you to be certain about the things that you believe. This isn't just some story that these are historical facts. And so many of these things, I think, are in the text here today. One of the reasons being is that it leads to the authenticity of the text that we're talking about, that we can believe that this is historically accurate. And you may say, well, who cares what is historically accurate of a conversation that Jesus had with somebody? Yeah, well, you know what you want to make sure that is historically accurate? What happens on Sunday? That's what you want to make sure. It's not just a story. Because if somebody made that up, like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, if it's just a story, if Jesus wasn't resurrected, if it wasn't history, then everything we do here is in vain. So I think it's the one reason. I think the one reason is some of these things are in here to help us to sort of get into, it's context, you know what I mean? It puts us in the context. And I hope you can feel the context as I try to describe these different encounters that Jesus had, because I think that helps draw you into the way you might have felt had you been there, okay? Here's the second reason why. The second reason why is because there's something else going on here that you can't see in a certain sense without a deeper look, all right? And in order to help you get that deeper look, here's the way I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna cheat, all right? I like to cheat, but that's beside the point. I'm gonna cheat, and I'm gonna jump ahead. We're on really Friday, the day of Jesus' death in our story here, our encounter of Jesus' story. And I'm gonna jump ahead to Sunday, to after the resurrection. And I want to read you a passage, and I think you'll see the point of it as we move along here. Let me read it to you. This is from the book of Luke, not Matthew. I know that's a violation of what we're doing already, but that's okay. It's from the book of Luke in the 24th chapter. And it tells a story about a couple who were disciples. They were serious, believers, and they had been up in Jerusalem over the weekend, and they were headed back to their home. Their home was in a little town called Emmaus, which was real close. And as they were walking back talking about things, all of a sudden it says Jesus started to walk along with them, but he kept them from recognizing him. And he asked them, this is Jesus, he asked them, he said, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. That's the way our face should be when we hear some of these stories you're about to hear. Their faces downcast. One of them, named Caiaphas, asked him, are you the only visitor in Jerusalem that doesn't know the things that have happened here these days? Which is kind of a stupid thing to say to Jesus on Resurrection Sunday, because he was the only one who knew what was going on, okay? He says, and Jesus playing stupid, he says, what things? And they say, well, about Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. And the chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we'd hoped that he would be the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what's more, it's the third day since all this took place. And in addition, some of our women amazed us, and they went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find a body. They came and told us that they'd seen a vision of an angel who said that he was alive. And then some of the companions went to the tomb, and they found it just as the women said, but they did not see him. And Jesus said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Well, what happens in the rest of the story is they wander, they finally get to Emmaus, and they get to these guys' house, and one of my favorite lines in the entire Bible, it says, Jesus acted as if he was gonna continue on. So in other words, when they got to the people's house, Jesus was like, well, I got nowhere to go. I guess I'll just be going down the road here. He was trying to get invited to dinner, you know? And finally they go, oh, no, stop eat with us. And so he goes in, and they begin to have dinner. And it says that Jesus prayed for the dinner, and he broke the bread. And all of a sudden, in the breaking the bread, they were able to realize who he really was. And then it says he disappeared. And you know what? You know what they said to each other after that? Didn't our hearts burn within us when he opened up the scriptures to us on the road? That's the kind of encounter you want to have with God. You want to hear him say something to you. You want to see his word come alive, be real, totally contextualized, not only in its own historical context, but in the context of your life, so that your heart burns within you as these things open up. So this is the question I had. When they had that little Bible study on the road, what did Jesus show them? It doesn't tell you in this passage what he showed. He says, beginning with Moses and then all the prophets, he showed them how these things had to happen to the Christ himself. What did he show them? I'm betting he showed them this passage right here, okay? And by the way, this passage, interestingly enough, is a passage from the book of Isaiah from chapter 53. And you know, that chapter 53 of the book of Isaiah was written 700 years before that night, the night we're talking about. On Friday, not to the day, but 700 years approximately. Isaiah wrote this. This is what he says. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before us like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and he was held in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. We considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds are we healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and a sheep before his shearers is silent. So he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested at that time? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. And yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer, and through the Lord make his life an offering for sin. And he'll see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he'll see the light of his life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, My righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I'll give a portion to the great, and I will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore his sin, the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. If you can try to keep that passage in mind as you hear these encounters that Jesus has, I think maybe your heart will begin to burn within you, and you'll begin to see exactly what God was doing at this time and why we hear these things. Well, anyway, it had been Thursday night. We talked about this already. They had the Last Supper. They'd gone to the 4 different places. They ended up eventually up at the Garden of Gethsemane in the northeast side of Jerusalem. And they're up there, and here's what happens. They're praying, and the praying's not going good for the disciples. It's late at night. Apparently, I don't know, it might have been 1, 2 o'clock in the morning by this time. On Friday, this is the last day Jesus is alive. And Jesus is pleading with the Father, if he can, really take this cup away from him. But then he says this, but not my will, but your will be done. I'm willing to die. I'm willing to do the thing that I came for. But it's going to be hard. I see it coming, and it's going to be rough. Meanwhile, the people that he thought he could get support from, they're all snoozing. He wakes them up. He asks them to stay awake, but they can't stay awake. They fall back asleep again. And so as he's praying, the Garden of Gethsemane is in a little higher place in the city of Jerusalem, and there's a gate down below south that if you people came up that way, you'd see him coming. And it was late at night, and Jesus probably looked down, all of a sudden he saw a gang of people coming up the hill. They had torches and so forth. He thought, what in the world? He probably thought, this is it. So what happens is Jesus goes out, all right? And he stands out in front waiting for this crowd to come. It turns out they're people from the Roman guards and also the temple guards that have come with. They've got clubs and swords and torches and so forth, and they've come to arrest Jesus. Now, what had happened previous to this, to the first encounter that Jesus has, is with a guy named Judas, all right? Judas had been at the dinner. He'd been at the Thursday night dinner, and he'd heard some stuff. And at that time, Jesus pointed out to him that, Judas, you're the one who's going to end up betraying me. One of my own disciples, one of the closest guys I have of the 12 here, you're going to betray me. You're going to turn me in, man. And Judas, he saw the handwriting on the wall, so to speak, and he left early. He was the one disciple who left the party early. And guess where he went? He went over to the temple, and he told the chief priests and so forth there, he said, listen, for $30, I'll point out who Jesus is when you send a crew over to arrest him. I know you want to arrest him. This would be a nice time to do it. I know where he is. It's late at night. He doesn't have very many people with him. You can get up there, surprise him, take him, and so forth. And I'll point him out, and so forth. Matter of fact, I know it's dark up there, and so forth. So what I'll do is, when I go up with the guys, I'll go over and give him a kiss. How ironic, a sign of affection as you betray somebody. Sounds like the Godfather here, And so what happens is the priest and so forth say, perfect. This is just in line with our plan, So Judas comes out of the crowd as Jesus comes out of the garden after he's been praying. And as he goes towards Jesus, he gives them that kiss. Judas. And when he gives him the kiss, he's identified him that he's the one, but still the crowd is standing there to arrest him. And Jesus says to him this, he says to him, who are you looking for? And they say, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And you know what Jesus says in response to that? He goes, I am. Interestingly enough, if you read the book of John, it's not in the book of Matthew, but if you read the book of John, when they say they're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, and Jesus responds, I am, he uses the very name of God from the book of Genesis, the I am name. And you know what it says in John? It says when he said it, the crowd drew back and fell on the ground. That'd make you think twice about arresting them, wouldn't it? But it didn't. They got back up. They were just doing their job. They got back up, and they went down, and they arrested Jesus. And they tied him up, and they took him off to Caiaphas for a trial, middle of the night. Meanwhile, Judas is feeling a little weird, about it. It wasn't by the way, especially after, he says, I am, and people fall down, you might think to yourself, oh, I might have been wrong about who this guy was. He might be somebody, And so in his remorse of having done that, he goes back to the temple and he says to the high priest, listen, I sinned. I betrayed an innocent man. I don't want the money. He throws the money back into the temple. He says, listen, I was wrong in doing that. And what happens? They say, here's what the chief priests say. Well, that's your responsibility. It's up to you. And he's left out to dry. Judas understands what he has done. He's turned his back on the I am. He's betrayed him that he knows will send him to his death. He is so, now here's the deal. Judas was not necessarily a great guy, okay? He was a piece of work. He was very concerned about money. As a matter of fact, he was sort of the money guy of the 12 disciples. Whenever they had cash and so forth, that they had to do to distribute, they gave it to him. He was sort of like the bank, that took care of the disciples and such. And he was very concerned. He liked money. He liked to be in that position because money has, I don't know if you recognize this, but in some cultures, money has power. And he liked that. He liked that idea of being able to have power and control, but the fact that his money. Matter of fact, he would do things that would help, and he would say things that would help him to get more money. Just the night before, some crazy woman came in with a bottle of perfume that cost a year's salary and poured it over Jesus' head. And who said something? Judas. He said, what are you doing? What a waste. Particularly, and here's what he's thinking in his own mind, particularly to pour it on a guy's head who's trying to make the Sanhedrin, the leaders of the Jews, angry enough to kill him. Why would you do that? This is a waste. Who knows when Judas in his own mind finally said, well, that's it, I've had enough. Maybe it was a little later when Jesus told him he was the one who was going to betray him. And he thought to himself, you bet your life I am. I'm going to see if I can make some money on this and make a run for it. But then after he'd done, here's the thing. Sometimes you do something and you think it seems like the right thing to do, like it's the thing that's going to lead you in the right direction. And after it's done, things are even worse than they were before. You ever had that happen? And so Judas decides he's had all he can handle. And so that very night, he goes out and hangs himself and kills himself. No, nobody kills themselves if they have any reason to live. But the point was this, you know what he thought? There's no way I can get out from under this. I've not only ruined the life of all these people that I've hung out with for the last several years and wasted my own time doing it, but this one who might be somebody, I don't know, I turned him in, I betrayed him, and he's gonna be killed. That blood's on me too. And where am I gonna go? I realized this was the wrong thing. I'm throwing the money back, and then I realized it's too late. And here's what happened. Judas all of a sudden realized nothing can overcome what I've done. Nothing can make it right. I can't be forgiven. I'm lost. It's the end. And so he kills himself. Hey, by the way, after he leaves and goes to kill himself, the priests at the temple, they pick up the coins that are in the temple and they say, oh, we can't put those coins in the treasury again because that's blood money. So we'll go out and we'll buy a field someplace where foreigners, people not like us, but not good people or anything, but people not like, we can bury some foreigners who happen to die while they're in Jerusalem. We'll buy some dirt someplace and throw them in there. Wait a minute. Couldn't put the stuff back in the treasury because it was blood money? Where did the money come from? The blood money came from the temple itself to give it to them. But this is the way you can get so self-righteous about certain things. You say, well, we have to do the right thing. We just paid somebody to betray somebody to us. And so Judas is the first encounter. The second encounter has to do with a guy named Peter. Peter stayed at the dinner, and while he was at the dinner, Peter heard from Jesus that before the rooster crowed the next morning that he would deny him 3 times. And Peter was like, No way. Absolutely no way. Because you know what Peter was like? He was so confident in his faith, so to speak. He was so confident how strong he was, how he could bear anything on it, just by the power of his will. That's all he needed. He didn't need anything else other than his own determination, his own fortitude, his own, So when Jesus suggests, by the way, every time Jesus would come up and tell the disciples earlier than this, that here's what was going to happen. He was going to go up to Jerusalem and be handed over by the chief priests and be tried, and then he'd be executed. And here's what Peter would say: no, we will not let that happen. That is not going to happen. Because I'm the man, I'm going to make sure I'll use my power. I'll use what I got available to me to stop this. But basically what he's trying to do, though, he's trying to stop the actual will of God moving forward. Just as a little aside, don't ever try to stop the will of God. That's not going to end well, all right, for you. And so here's what happens. That night when Jesus goes out from the prayer, from the garden, and Judas comes forth and kisses him, and they come to arrest him. And after they get up off the ground, they wander over towards Jesus to tie him up to take him. Peter's, next thing you know, right by his side, and he pulls out a sword. And then this is his plan. He's gonna kill the guy who tries to. And by the way, it says that he cut off his ear, okay? And then afterwards, Jesus healed it. But he says he cut off his ear. But you know what? I think he wanted to cut off his head. And I think probably what happened was, the guy probably moved. And so he just got the glancing blow on the ear to cut off. But he wanted to kill him. And when he did it, Jesus said to him, put the sword away. He says, don't you realize people who live by the sword, die by the sword? That's not how my kingdom is going to go forward, not by force. Peter was like, what in the world? You think people are just going to sort of surrender themselves to you somehow without a fight? You don't think we're going to have to kill some people here? We're going to have to go to war? I thought this was like a kind of political takeover. I thought we were going to toss out these nasty Romans and so forth. I thought you were the Messiah, that sort of geopolitical Messiah who was going to reinstate the kingdom of David and so forth. And I want to be the first one in line to take the first strike. I'm that kind of guy. I'm a doer. I'm gonna work it. I've got skills, sort of like the guy in Taken. I've got a certain set of skills that you don't want to discover, But Jesus stops him. And he says, no, that's not what it's about. And so Peter retreats. They tie up Jesus and they take him up to Caiaphas' place. And when they get up to Caiaphas' place, it says that Peter sort of, by the way, all the rest of the disciples made a run for it when that happened, when they arrested him. Jesus had told him a little earlier, he had repeated another prophecy, not by Isaiah, but somebody else. He said this, he said, when they strike the shepherd, the sheep will scatter. That's exactly what happened. When they tied up the shepherd, the sheep scattered. But not Peter, because, he was solid. He wasn't going to turn. So what happens, he follows Jesus up in the crowd up to Caiaphas' place. And as he's standing there to try to see what's going to happen, sure enough, somebody comes up to him and says, a woman comes up to him and says, hey, you're one of those guys who was with this Jesus guy. And he goes, oh, no, not me. I don't know where his courage went all of a sudden, And then some other person comes up and says, no, you actually are one of the guys who was one of the disciples. No, I don't know him. And finally, somebody else comes and says, I've heard you talking. You got a Galilean accent. And, Jesus is from Galilee and so forth. You're one of Jesus' people. You're with him. And he swears at him this time. It doesn't say what he swore. I'm not going to take a guess. But probably wouldn't be good to do that. But he swore at him at this time to say, absolutely not. What is wrong with you? No. And then all of a sudden, the rooster crows. And he remembers that Jesus had told him. Could it be that Jesus knew more about what was going on than he did? Could it be that it was about something Jesus had to do, not about something Peter had to do? Maybe it was about surrendering to what God's will is and what he has in mind to have happen, rather than to try to force your will on a particular situation. You know, I had a friend when I was growing up, and he lived in the community next to us, and we used to hang out with him all the time. One time around Halloween, we went over to his house, and we were going to take him out and go mess around. And as we got over there, we saw there was a big pile of leaves in the front yard. And as we walked up the steps, I said to my friend, hey, listen, I'll bury you in the big pile of leaves. I said, when we get Casey out here, I'll tell him, what is that in the leaves? I said, then when he goes over to the pile of leaves, you jump out of the leaves, scare him, you know? And he was like, oh, okay. So I buried him in the leaves. I go up and knock on the door. And Casey's dad comes to the door. I say, hey, is Casey here? And he goes, no, he'll be back in just a little bit. And I thought to myself, well, I already got him buried in the leaves over there, you know? So I said to his dad, there's something weird in that pile of leaves over there, you know? So his dad goes over to the front yard, and now my friend expects our friend to be there, you know? And so the dad goes over, he starts kicking in the pile, and my friend grabs his leg and starts to bite his leg until he realizes it's his dad, you know? He's like, oh, hi, Mr. Kendall, how you doing, you know? Yeah. Every time after that, when Casey was going to go out with us, they'd be at dinner. His dad would say, what are you going to do? He says, oh, I'm going out with Norm and Terry. And his dad would say, don't you have any other friends? You know, people think they can make friends. Make them. That's not the way things work. You can't make anything happen in a way. And if you try to make it happen, you got an inflated view of yourself. Just in case you missed this again, God is the creator and controller of the universe. The way to figure out how to live is to try to figure out how to live within the context of his will. Peter all of a sudden got a vivid thing. He realized Jesus said I would betray him 3 times before the rooster just crowed, and I just did it 3 times. You know what it says Peter did? He went outside and he wept bitterly. He wept bitterly. Nothing had happened to him much other than he realized how stupid and goofy he was by thinking somehow his life was in his own hand. Judas's attempt to have his life in his own hand ruined him and took him to suicide. Peter, on the other hand, you know what he did? He realized, I have to surrender to the will of God. And thank goodness from what Jesus has taught me, that God's gracious. Judas thought, there's no way you can overcome the brokenness in my life. There's no way that somebody can make me right and heal my wounds by what they suffer. But Peter all of a sudden realized there was a way in which that could happen. Well, the next person that we come in contact with is actually a guy named Caiaphas. And this is at the place where the trial that night was taking place. Now, by now, here's the deal. We're in the middle of the night, it's, maybe 4 o'clock, in the morning. And Caiaphas has been planning this thing, okay? He's the chief priest. He's the head priest of the temple and for that year for all the people and such. And by the way, he had a thing in for Jesus. He did not want Jesus to see. How about this one here? Back in John 11, if you ever want to read that sometime, when Jesus, when he brought Lazarus back from the dead, you read the story about Lazarus being back from the dead? And Lazarus had been dead for 3 days. And he smelled and everything. And Jesus comes and he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, even though he's dead, yet shall he live. The power of who he really was, the living God right there. And of course, people didn't get it exactly, but they knew something was happening. And when he came forth, you know what it says? It says, many believed that he was the Messiah. And Caiaphas did not like that. Caiaphas was there. He saw it. And instead of rejoicing in the miracle, and honoring as being the person who can do these things, you know what he did? He turned around and said, this guy's going to get us in trouble. There's going to be religious conflict in the country, and the Romans are going to crack down on us. And the privilege we have right now and the power positions that we were in are going to be jeopardized. And so we got to do something. You know what? Let's make a plan to kill him. On the day the I am reveals him, one of the times that he reveals himself to be the loving God who can bring life out of death, the religious guy says we got to kill him. And in a little bit of irony, and if you read the passage again, he says this to him. He says this to the other people he's talking about. Isn't it better that one guy die instead of the whole nation perish? Well, that was exactly the plan of God. But he didn't know it. That wasn't his plan. His plan was to maintain his power position. So what happens is he makes the deal with Judas. I think he reached out to Judas earlier, or Judas did to him some way. They made the plan beforehand. Because after all, he went to the temple and they paid him to do it. He told him, when you're done, bring him up to my place. That's where we're going to have the trial. He had gathered the Sanhedrin, the group of leaders, to be able to have a trial there. He didn't have enough people exactly to be able to have the trial, but it was enough of a start. And he goes up there, and basically what he does is he tries to, here's what the passage in Matthew says. He brought false witnesses in to try to get them to testify against Jesus so that they could convict him of something that would be worthy of them being able to give him the death penalty. But he screwed it up. The false witnesses had, conflicting testimonies, and other people said, that's not that bad, and blah, 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 And finally, here's what happens. He's so frustrated that they can't, and every time a new accusation comes against Jesus, you know what Jesus says? Nothing. He didn't open his mouth. He allowed himself to be unjustly charged over and over and over again and never opened his mouth. And then finally, here's what happens. Finally, in a fit of frustration, the high priest says to Jesus, I command you on an oath from God to answer this question. Are you the Christ, the Son of God? And you know what? This is the question Jesus had been waiting to get a chance to answer. And he said, yes. That's all Caiaphas needed. He ripped his clothes. He said blasphemy. He called himself God. In our just system of laws, he deserves the death penalty. I got what I needed. The death penalty against this Jesus, we can get rid of him. We can maintain the status quo. We can keep on going the way they're going. Because, Jesus is one of those guys that when he gets into your life, unless you get rid of him, he gets into your life, he messes it all up. He asks you to change, and you do different things, and you have a new perspective. Oh my gosh, Let's have it, just keep it the way it was. So he's happy about it. By the way, after Jesus said yes, in response to saying yes, you know what he said as well? He quoted a passage from Daniel 7, where he said, one came on the clouds, the Son of Man came on the clouds to the Ancient of Days, meaning God. And as he came, he was given glory and honor and worship. And he was given praise, and he was invited to have a kingdom that would be a never-ending kingdom. And he sat down beside God on the right hand. Oh, that was just icing on the cake for Caiaphas. He's just pouring it on now. These Messiah passages, and the ones where he recognizes himself as being the Son of God. And so, fantastic. We don't need any more evidence. So he's got him convicted. But he hasn't got enough people there. So what happens is he calls the early morning, sunrise meeting of the quorum of the Sanhedrin to make sure that he can get this officially done. Because here's the thing. If you're a righteous person, you got to do things right. If you're going to get rid of Jesus and condemn him, you got to have some good reason and make sure that it's all proper and so forth, so you can sort of let yourself off the hook later on. You did the right thing. You maintained the way things need to be. And so when the quorum gets there, he tells them what he's done, and they have to vote yes, okay, execute him. There's only one problem. The Jews don't have the right to execute anybody in a Roman province. Only the Romans have the ability to execute somebody. And so you know what they got to do? They got to take him over to Pilate. Now, by the way, they take him early in the morning over to Pilate, and Pilate's already waiting for him. Gee, I wonder how that happened. Wonder who set that up. And by the way, when they get over there, when Jesus goes in before Pilate, and first thing he says to him, well, what's this guy now? What's the charge against him and so forth? they say, before they get a chance to say, well, he claims this is Jesus of Nazareth. And he goes, whoa, whoa. He's a Galilean. He goes, Herod, is the kind of governor over there. He's a Jewish guy. He says he gets to see these things first. So here's what Pilate tries to do. He tries to sort of blow him off, and he sends him over to somebody else to get sentenced. But Herod's not going to fall for that. He's not going to make the mistake. So he sends him. He says, no, you have the jurisdiction. You got to do things right. So he sends him back to Pilate. Pilate gets back, and Pilate says, okay. He asks him a few things about charges that have been brought against him. And Pilate turns around and says, this guy's innocent. These charges are lame. That's your stuff. You deal with it. This has anything to do with me. And then he comes back into Jesus and he says to him this. I do have one question. Did you say that you're the king of the Jews? I wonder where he got that. I wonder who told him that he had told him that he was the king of the Jews. By the way, the Messiah could become the king of the Jews. You couldn't get the death penalty for claiming that you're the Messiah from Jews. You could get the death penalty from claiming that you were God. Blasphemy. But the other one, when Caiaphas asked the question, are you the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God? He did the double question so that they could have the Jewish one convict him, and then they would be able to have the Roman one be able to convict him too, as saying that he was the king of the Jews, and hence it would be treason against the Roman Empire. And you know what? Again, Jesus was waiting for that question. And although he kept his mouth shut and all those things, his mouth was closed for all the other accusations that Pilate talked to him about. Finally, when he said, are you the king of the Jews? He said, it is as you say I am. And then what happens is that immediately after, Pilate still doesn't want to do it. He goes back out. He says, listen, this guy, king of the Jews, it's kind of a lame, kind of a, And he says, I tell you what, I got this thing where when you get a holiday, like Passover coming up, you try to appease the people by doing a nice thing for them. And what I do is I let a prisoner go every Passover. And I got a couple prisoners here that I could let go. How about if I let Jesus go? I let this Jesus of Nazareth guy go. And they're like, no, crucify him, give him the death penalty. And he goes, listen, I got another guy in here. His name's Barabbas. By the way, do you know what Barabbas' first name was? Jesus. He says, you want Jesus Barabbas or you want Jesus of Nazareth? I'll give you one of them. One of them gets out, the other one has to die. And they say, the crowd starts to yell, give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas. And so he gives him Barabbas and he says, well, what about this Jesus of Nazareth? And the chief priests and the crowd begin to yell as loud as the people did on Palm Sunday that he was the Lord. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And Pilate goes over and publicly washes his hands and he says, well, it's your responsibility now. And he sends him over to be flogged so that it's over. Hey, the last group that we talk about is the crowd. Jesus has met with Judas. He's talked with Peter. He's dealt with Caiaphas. He's been with Pilate. And now he's with the crowd. And the beginning of the thing being with the crowd is sending over for the first part of what the execution process was. It began with a flogging. Now, Jesus has already been beaten up by the crowd. When he was up at Caiaphas' house, it tells us this. When they said he was guilty, they spit on him. Everybody spit on him. His face covered with people having spit on him. They began to smack him and hit him. They hit him with clubs. They hit him with their hands. Now, after he's been convicted by the Romans to death, he's sent over for the first phase of the execution. It's the flogging. And for the flogging, they had a special way of doing it when you were going to crucify somebody. They used a thing called a flagrum. And it was a whip that had a piece of wood at the bottom of it, and then to the top of it, there were these 6 leather straps. And at the end of each one of the 6 leather straps was a little metal dumbbell, and into the side of the dumbbell with pieces of leather were sewn pieces of metal, shards of metal, and bone, sharp bone. And so what happened was they'd strip you down, and then they would beat you with this whip. I mean, Romans knew how to kill people. And that was the point of this. The point of this was to get you so weak that when you went on the cross, it wouldn't take long before you would die. Matter of fact, the beating was, here's what would happen. They'd hit you. As soon as they hit you the first time, the little dumbbells hitting you would bring the blood up to the top of your skin. Then the next time they would hit you, maybe one little, poke in there. Then pretty soon you start to rip the skin off. The skin starts to fall off and strips all over your body. You begin to get whipped and you're being beaten unbelievably. People reported that sometimes people died from the flogging. They didn't get a chance to get crucified because what would happen was they'd hit them so badly that their muscles and their skin and their muscles would break, and finally their intestines and so forth would fall out on the ground. They'd just bleed out and die right there. Jesus was beaten mercilessly with this. And when it was all over, if that wasn't bad enough, you know what they did? They got him up and they put a robe on him. It was probably the robe of one of the soldiers. It was purple or something like that. And then they took some thorns from a plant, they formed it into a crown and put it on his head. And they gave him a staff and they took him out in front of the crowd who was yelling, "Crucify him, crucify him." And they got down on the ground and mocked him by saying, "King, King of the Jews, King of the Jews." King. Then they started smacking him again, hitting him in the face, spitting on him. They put a blindfold on him for a while, smacked him and said, "Hey, you're a prophet. Tell who hit you. Say who hit you. Say who hit you." The naked Jesus then gets a chance to carry his own beam down to where he's going to be crucified. So there you have it. There you have it, 5 encounters. Wait a minute, hold it. Let me see if I got that Isaiah 53 passage right here. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering, familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds were we healed. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation even protested? Because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. I think Jesus may have shared that with those guys on the road to Emmaus. And all of a sudden they realized why what had happened that had been predicted 700 years before that night. And it was a dark, dark night. The unbelievable love of God and graciousness that allows himself to be tortured in that way for us should change us. We should feel a fire in our hearts when we hear this kind of stuff about how gracious God is and the punishment that he took on our behalf. And in the story right now, we're still on Friday. It's Friday. The cross is coming up. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. Let's pray. Lord, thanks for this day. Thanks for a chance to consider these things. We thank you for your word, all of it in the way in which you have allowed us to see that you are a God who's in control. And Lord, we surrender to your love and your graciousness. Make us into the kind of people you want us to be. We pray this in Jesus' name and for his kingdom's sake. Amen. See y'all.